I'm Georgia. I'm the head of customer here at Candu. So I spend most of my day building content in our editor and helping our customers get content live and published. And so I'm excited to be able to share some of that with all of you today. Awesome. I'm actually going to start sharing my screen. Actually, a quick housekeeping note. I posted a few links in the chat, which hopefully everyone can see. We'll be using those throughout today's session. So it should be an interactive session. The top link will be for our preview Chrome extension, which will allow you to test out the content in any app, hopefully your own. And presumably a lot of you are coming here because you've already signed up for Candu. So in that case, use the sign-in page. Or if you haven't already, please sign up for a free trial account. It'll make the session a little bit more fun if you can build content alongside us. Awesome. Okay, let's get started. Start with some slides and then we'll get into the fun part. Here we go. Cool. So today we'll go through our welcome. Check, already did it. Then we'll go through what is Candu, give you a little overview of what our software does and how people are using it currently. And then we'll jump into the fun part where we'll actually build out a piece of content. So today I was thinking we'd build an announcement bar. So I'll give you an overview of the Candu interface. We'll actually get into the content building and then we can test at the end, previewing all of that content in your app. I have a couple of my colleagues monitoring the chat. I won't be looking at it, but I'll definitely leave time for Q&A at the end. But if you have something important, just put it in the chat and my colleagues will interrupt me so that we can make sure that your question gets answered in the proper moment. Awesome. All right, so let's get started with what is Candu. Candu is sort of the middle ground between a total website builder and like a pop-up interactive tour that you might put in there. So the idea is that instead of building an entire website, there are times when you really just want to be able to modify certain components of your application, particularly your UI. If you're thinking about when you're in your app, there's a lot of things your engineering team is working on, and a lot of their focus is on improving the core of what your product does. It's not always on improving the UI or how you communicate with your customers in app. And so what we noticed is what often happens is that the key places where you're trying to communicate with your customers either have to be through email or through pop-ups or through sort of generic language that isn't really custom to any user. And so what we wanted to do was to create a way for non-developers to have a space in your application, whether that's a sidebar or a dashboard, where you can actually modify content regularly without needing to go through your development team. And so what Candu is your developer, like with a lot of other softwares, will just insert a little snippet in the page where they're giving you access. And then you can just build content and modify content using Candu's WYSIWYG editor, which then you can publish to your application. And the beauty of it is that you can set up your styles in Candu so that all the content really actually looks like your dev team built it. No one knows that it's not like an iframe where people can tell that it doesn't really fit. It's really meant to just blend right in. The other cool thing about it is that, one, it allows you to do a lot of UI experimentation that you previously couldn't do. The other cool thing is that you can actually do user segmentation as well. So depending on who you want to be targeting your messaging to, you can change out the language, change out the imagery, and really make it a customized experience for your users. Cool. So what does that actually look like for people who are using it currently? Right now, we've seen a few different sets of use cases. So these sort of no-code refreshes, which I talked about at the top, this idea that people were using sort of generic content and now they can do more regular updates of content for things like release notes or announcements, which is actually what we'll build today. Another thing that people are using for a lot is UI experimentation. So we have a user onboarding, it works okay. Are there things that we could do to improve it? Can we change out some of the content or change out where we put the video to see if that gets more engagement with our users. Another place we're seeing it is with shortcuts. So like we have all these integrations that we just have in this sort of like linked list. If we make that a visual list, does that get people's attention more? And finally, the final thing that I talked about is some people are using it for this really cool custom welcome customization. So they're actually getting to the account level and creating custom welcome messages so that they can really give their enterprise clients sort of that white glove feel. And here's some examples of what that looks like. One of our clients built this whole new dashboard for their self-service clients that they know they're not going to get to talk to individually, but want to give resources to get them started. One of our clients used it to build this really great dashboard that is where they share the release notes and upcoming events and other things that might be more relevant for their clients to keep them sort of engaged with the dashboard before they jump into the product. We've also built a lot of announcement bar templates that some of our clients are using to really try and drive home messaging. So upcoming releases, upcoming important key dates, or often like when you have your annual event and you want to get people signing up, you can take that out of email and put it into the application where people are paying more attention. We're also using it, which we'll see when we get into Candu. So we've iterated over our onboarding and our dashboard a number of times using cards and checklists and trying out different features to see what gets people's attention and what helps them get further into the application. And finally, these are some new UI experimentation shortcuts that we've put together for our integrations page. So instead of just telling people, hey, we have some integrations, we made it a little bit more visually appealing and fun to play with. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions about where Candu sits or how it works? I know that was kind of a fast overview, but this is concluding our overview portion. So I want to make sure everyone feels comfortable with Candu. Let's see. All right, looks good. Awesome. Okay, well now let's actually jump into Candu itself. So in the chat, I shared the login links or the sign up links. So if you can go ahead and get into your account or create an account now, you can follow along as we go through everything. Okay, so I've created myself a demo account here that we can play around with. The first thing that you'll note is that here's a dashboard that is built entirely with Candu components. So what happened was our developers just installed a snippet. They gave us this whole page to play with. And so each of these is just a content block that we built with Candu. Here I am. Here's our webinar that we're in right now. After this, I can actually just go in and update this to provide a link to anyone who wants to watch the recording of this directly on the app. And then you'll see the quick start guide that I was showing in the deck before as a GIF is actually right here. You know, we've updated the GIFs throughout as we've updated our UI. It makes it really easy to just keep things fresh and make sure that as we release new features, those are featured in the UI. Doesn't get old and stale. So that's the dashboard. The next thing that I want to talk about is just as an overview is the content section. So that's going to be the editor where we'll spend most of our time today. That's where you create the content that you'll ultimately end up publishing into your application. I'm actually going to skip portals for a second, but segments are user segments that you can create. These are really simple if-then logic of any data that you send us. So whether that's organization ID or date joined, this is a really easy way to create groups of users that you can share content with. And finally, portals are where if you're publishing different pieces of content to different sets of users, the idea of a portal is just who sees what. It's just a way to combine those two concepts together. And finally, we have a users table. So once you've published your content, especially if you're publishing to different user segments, it's really helpful to see all of the users who have seen content and understand what they're seeing and who they are, and just check their user traits to make sure everything's matching up properly. So that won't be live right now since I haven't published anything, but I highly recommend using that once you go live. Awesome. Okay, let's jump into building content. I think that's the fun part. So here we are. I haven't created anything yet, so we'll start with that. You can create something from scratch, which is what I'm going to do today, because I think it's a nice way to get started with the editor. But when you're playing around, I actually really recommend using our templates. We've worked with our designer and a bunch of our clients to create a lot of different best-in-class templates, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So you can see them all here. We have a series of announcement bars, things like scheduled maintenance or feature introductions. And with each of these, you just create the content and then you can replace all of the text, all of the imagery, anything about it that you want. We also have a bunch of different types of cards. So like those integration cards we were talking about, or if you're looking for something more visual, we have this option. We have a checklist for things like onboarding, and we have dashboards. So these are really helpful if you're interested in doing somewhat more complex layouts and have a whole page to play around with. The list goes on, but really, this is a great way to get your head wrapped around what you can do with Candu, and also a nice way to get started with layouts so you understand so you don't need to worry about building things from scratch. I definitely recommend playing around with the templates. One last thing to note is that if you create content that you love and you want to make a bunch of iterations of it, you can actually create your own template from content and then just keep reusing it. So that's a nice trick for down the line. But today, we actually want to create content from scratch. So let's click into new content, and then you'll click this blank canvas option right here. And the first thing we'll do is we'll give it a name. So today I'm just going to call it demo announcements. And down the line, you can create different sections, which basically act as folders. So if you're creating a lot of different content, this is a nice way to stay organized. But today we'll leave that as uncategorized. Awesome. All right, so we'll hit create. And now we're in the actual Candu editor. So let's do a quick tour of what we can do here. On the left over here, we have what's called the palette. So these are all of the options of things that I can drag over onto the page to create these UI blocks that we're going to plug into our application. Once I've created something, you'll see over here, we've got the toolbar on the right. So depending on the element I'm on, the toolbar will allow me to do different things. In this case, I'm looking at the whole screen. And so it's allowing me to do some layouting options of centering or less justifying content. Also up here at the top, this is really handy if, for instance, you've installed Candu in a sidebar nav, which some of our clients do, or just like at the top bar. So instead of having it take up my whole screen, I can set it to, let's say, 400 pixels, and then I can work within the actual size of my sidebar. So I get a really good sense of what it's going to look like when we're in the published version. Switch that to auto for now. And the last thing that I think is actually really important for us to talk about before we jump in is the style guide section here at the top. So the style guide is how you make Candu look like your application instead of like Candu. So right now the style guide by default is set up with our styles, but for instance, if you use Montserrat is a really popular font, we can change that out. We can change out the colors. And one really nice thing to note about this is that once you've set up your foundational text and your foundational colors, those will flow through to all of the other elements. So if you know your primary color is, I don't know, bright pink, you can set that here like this, click Save Style. And then when you open the next section, the component section where you can set buttons, you'll see that that's already flowing through. So you don't need to duplicate effort or do things over. You can also do quite a bit of interaction with buttons. I know this is something that companies have a lot of specificity around. So you can set the background color, obviously, but you can also do things like the hover effects. You can create borders. You can change out the fonts. So you can really do a lot with the style guide to try and make this content match your page perfectly. Cool. Okay, we don't need to go through everything right now, but I definitely recommend before you try publishing content, spending a little time with this and either a designer on your team or if you have like a brand style sheet, just going through and updating this. This is also something we're happy to help with if you want to reach out to us. Awesome. Okay, so let's actually get into building content. I know a blank screen is a lot to look at, but I was thinking today we'd build an announcement bar for announcing a new, maybe like a newsletter for something that people should sign up for. So I'm going to start by dragging a card, or actually, because I don't want to interrupt people's workflow too much, I'm going to drag a dismissal card onto the page, which means that people can either click into it or they can click out of it using this little X to get it off their page. And the nice thing about Candu is that the way it's installed, if someone X'd out of this announcement bar, your page would just pull up to replace that as if the Candu content was never there. So it won't leave like a weird blank space on your UI. Cool. Okay, so this is a good time to talk a little bit more about what options are on the toolbar. If I ultimately decided I wanted this card to be static and stay for all of my users forever, I could turn off the dismissible option. I can also do a lot with layouting, which looks a little bit intimidating at first, but is actually really intuitive once you get used to it. This one will actually be really important to us today. So the idea of content direction is if you think about adding something to, let's say like a Google Doc, that's always going to add top to bottom. When you add the next piece of text, it's going to add to the new line. But when you think about adding something, let's say to like a slide deck, often you'll want to add things side by side. And that's when you get into the row layout, which is actually what we'll use today. So let's set this to row. We have a question. Can you decide who sees the announcement? Say if you want to target to a specific subset of users. Yes, you can do that. So you can use segmentation, user segments, to determine who sees what content. So you could say, I only want new users to see this announcement, or I only want to have users who have not signed up for my newsletter to see this announcement. And to do that, you just need to send that data to Candu, and then you could use user segments to publish to like X group of users and not to Y group of users. So you can actually really reduce the noise that you create in your application. That's a great question. Awesome. Okay, so we have this set up to row, so everything's going to add left to right instead of top to bottom, and we can actually play around with that now. So if you drag, I want to drag an image over here in media. There's a couple of different ways that you can upload images. You can use the link feature, so you could link, like if you had something from Google Images you wanted to put in here, you could do that here. You can also upload by like dragging an image onto the screen. And finally, we keep a stored media library. So I've already added this image in that I want to use. I've also linked to an image library in case you don't have an image off the top of your head you want to use. So in the chat, there should be a link to a Google Drive photo if you want to download a couple images just for testing purposes. Cool. Okay, so if I select this image I've already imported, it's huge. This is much too big for what I'm looking for. It's set to 100% width of the page right now. So I can actually select between pixels and percentages. So if I change that to 100 pixels, now it's a little too small. I don't have great rules on pixel sizes. It's best to know what size of screen you're trying to insert this content into to make those decisions. But you can also, just based on how it looks, you can use these little arrow keys to try and get to a place that you like. I like 250 for today. Now, I wanted my announcement to have my image on the far left and then have the content, the text coming out to the right. So right now the image is centered, which is not how I want it. So I'm going to change my content alignment at the card level to be left aligned. And here's one other fun tip that I actually think is really valuable with Candu, which is that once you're clicked into a component on the editor, you can use your arrow keys to navigate around. So once you have a lot of components on the page, it's going to be really helpful. All right, cool. So the next thing I want to do is add a heading. And you can note the style guide updates I made. This heading now has the new font that I added. So all the style guide updates you make will come through directly into the editor. Cool. Okay, so let's say you can click into the font and newsletter. And the nice thing is I can have someone who is better at copy come in and fix this up for me later. Cool. Okay, so under that, I want to get people a little more excited about what we're doing. Actually have some text. I'm going to copy over here and just paste it in. You can put whatever you want in here, obviously. And so this is a pretty good announcement bar. One thing we could do if we wanted just the whole card itself to be clickable is we could come over here, and this little modal allows you to add a URL so we could have it link out. This probably isn't relevant for this announcement bar, but we could also have it open a mail client. So you can email support or marketing ad or a specific person. And we also have the option to launch a guide product. So some of our users didn't want guide products launching automatically and interrupting their users' flow. They wanted to give their users a little bit more ownership of their experience. And so this is a really nice way to do that. But today we'd probably put in a URL to sign people, to send people to a sign up page or to sign people up automatically. I actually think in this case, it's probably nicer to have a button to link people out so they know exactly what to click on. So if we add a button, because we set the alignment of the whole card to row, if we try to add a button below the text, it's going to add all the way over here to the right, which I don't think is a very good look. So the solution to that is actually, surprisingly, to add a layout to the page, which will come here. But what we want to do is just, if you hit Shift, you can do multi-select. So we'll just drag the text into this layout. And then using our arrow keys, we'll note that the layout has been set to column instead of to row. So the content will now add top to bottom. So instead of the button we had, delete that guy because he's way out there. We can add a button down here. And you can click into the text. So for instance, if I want to call this a subscribe button, you can click in, subscribe, I can type, and then you can add your link here. And that makes it a little bit more visible to clients that this is what they should be clicking on. And then we probably want to set this to wrap. It's overflowing a little bit from the card. So we'll probably want to set that to wrap too. And yeah, as you can see, pretty easy to switch things around. Sometimes we break things and then we can just fix them. There's a lot of different ways to undo content. You can hit the undo button up here. We also, in settings, have an awesome history tracking feature. So you can always go back and change the content so that it looks exactly the way you want it to. You should really think of nothing in the editor gets published to your clients until you hit this publish button. So you can really think of it as a playground for creating UI and updating it, honestly, as regularly as you want. Once Candu is installed on your page, all of that UI is totally in your control. You don't need a developer to keep making any updates for you. You can keep pushing out new content. And I ended exactly at 1:25, which was what I was hoping for. That gives us 5 minutes for Q&A. Have I missed any questions? Oh, great. Okay, how does it, Jonathan asked, how does it embed on the page? That's such a good question. So there's actually a number of different ways to install Candu. You can do something as simple as Google Tag Manager if you don't want to get a developer involved at all. You just need to figure out where on the page you want to install it. And we have some really great documentation on this if this is something you're interested in. You can also have a developer use a really simple CDN installation, which should take them maybe 10 minutes. It's really mostly just a matter of figuring out where you want it to live, which actually reminds me, I missed the most important part of this demo, which is our Chrome extension, which hopefully you downloaded from the link I sent you. It'll look like this when you pull it up, and just make sure that when you click on your Chrome extensions, you have it pinned to your nav bar. So let's actually take a chance. This is not a great example. You would never, unless you work at the New York Times, you wouldn't be installing it on the New York Times, but let's just take a look at what it looks like to plug in Candu. So if we open this Chrome extension, there's a couple of options. So if you haven't built content yet and you're not quite sure and you just want to play around with different areas of your site, you can use our pre-built templates and preview what those would look like in app. But today, since we did build this demo announcement, we can open it up and you'll see this red dotted line means that I can't insert it here, but here we go. I got the yellow dotted line, which means I'm good to go. And taking a second to load, but there we go. It's pulling all the styles that we set up in the style guide. This is probably not quite matching the New York Times, but if you're in the logged in experience of your application, you can really just use this preview to preview how the content that you're building looks before you do that installation process. So you can feel really comfortable that it will look the way you want it to when you're done. Alex asks, how complex can the logic behind the button be? For instance, can I make a button click, change the page to a dark mode, or shoot off an analytics event before linking to our URL? That's a great question. Right now, mainly the button asks are linking to separate URLs or sending those email guides, but sending those emails or linking to guides. We have heard a couple of requests about connecting JavaScript events to the buttons. So that's something that we're considering. But for right now, if you wanted to, like, for instance, change it to dark mode, you would need to do our URL change for that to happen. That's a great question. Awesome. Okay, well, I think that covers most of what I wanted to get through today. Hopefully that gives you a sense of getting into the editor and building out your own content. I definitely recommend, we're all here to help building content and publishing content. So if this session was interesting to you, we'll send out the video again if you want to rewatch it, but also please reach out to me. My email is georgia@candu.ai, pretty simple, but I'm always happy to help with a content building workshop and helping you get content live. So that's something I get really excited about, and I'd love to help any of you. Awesome. Well, I think we're at the bottom of the hour. It's 1:30 here. Thank you so much for attending and joining us. Hopefully this was helpful as an overview of Candu, and please feel free to email me any follow-up questions or set up a time to talk more. Awesome. Thank you all so much.